In 1948, the three non-communist occupation owners of Western Germany, US, Britain, and France, decided it was time to reunite Germany, and they began to plan for a new form of money, a new currency, which was known as a Deutschmark, which was used before the euro came into play. They contacted the fourth member, the USSR, who refused to cooperate. In part, it was because they feared a strong, reunited Germany. They had certainly suffered at the hands of Germany in World War I and World War II. But also, they wanted to keep their section as a communist satellite. Here's a map that shows how the occupation zones of Germany were set up. And you can see these three here united to become West Germany, and the Soviet zone became East Germany. To force Great Britain, France, and the US into accepting his view of how Germany should look, Stalin used the city as a hostage. In June of 1948, the Red Army closed the roads to Berlin, ostensibly for repairs. Now, if you look back at the map, you can see that Berlin lies wholly within the Soviet zone. Berlin itself had been divided into four as well. So now, 3/4 of Berlin was locked off or shut off from any access and relied completely on the goodwill of the Soviets for their survival. By cutting off the food supplies and fuel and water, Stalin hoped that the people of West Berlin would soon capitulate and join in the Soviet occupation and become part of the Soviet Union's satellites. So if we're going to follow containment, if Truman is going to do what he said, if the Marshall Plan will be implemented, we will have to do everything we can to supply our friends in West Berlin. For 321 days, the US and the Allies airlifted food, coal, and clothing to people in West Berlin. 2 million residents were completely cut off. Watch this video and imagine the sheer scope of what had to be done to keep the people of West Berlin alive. There were so many planes going in and out of the airport in West Berlin that they were stacked up literally in the air in 5 different levels, and as one would take off, the next one would land. This lasted for over 11 months. After you watch the video, look at these photos. You can see the rubble. You can see how low the planes are flying. I'm not sure in the video if they mentioned, but one special pilot would load up his plane with chocolate bars and drop them to the children waiting below. Now this picture's kind of crazy because it's glass milk bottles, so you can assume they're not dropping them from the plane, but they are unloading them as quickly as possible as the plane has landed. Here's another picture of the kids waiting for the candy. The pilot, I forget his name, he just died a few years ago. He was known as the Candy Uncle, and I hope from looking at this picture that in addition to candy, he's dropping some long pants to these boys since they're growing out of their little shorts there and look mighty cold. So if you look at this map, this is the way Germany looked from 1948 until 1989. West Germany was about twice the size as East Germany, and the Iron Curtain went right through here and divided Eastern and Western Germany. The official name of West Germany at the time was the German Federal Republic, and ironically, the official name of the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, remained that, as I said, until 1990. Notice they called themselves the Democratic Republic, which is somewhat ironic since nobody could vote there unless it was for a communist candidate. And you can see in the map here, West Berlin remains a bastion of freedom and a symbolic symbol, obviously, until 1990, of a little island of democracy and freedom surrounded by oppression. What else came out of this time? If you remember, during the Yalta Agreement, President Roosevelt insisted on the creation of a United Nations. The first meeting was held in San Francisco even before the war ended in April of '45. Today, it is located on the east side of Manhattan. Within the United Nations themselves, there are 6 major bodies. The General Assembly is where every nation has a vote. There's a separate body known as the Security Council that contains 15 members. Permanent members, which represent the leading powers at the time, were the United States, Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and China. 10 other countries would rotate through this body. Each of those 5 permanent members have veto power. This is why not much gets done with the United Nations. If you look at these 5 members, the United States, Great Britain, and France are capitalist democracies, and the USSR and China are communist countries. Depending on who makes up the other 10 at any given moment, their votes often cancel each other out. And again, this power of the veto means that it's rare they can push something forward. The United Nations has had some success in helping during pandemics, in helping children around the globe. You probably remember those little UNICEF orange boxes you used to carry around at Halloween. That money is given to the United Nations to help children in impoverished countries around the world. So what happened to Japan? They surrendered in August of '45. Anybody know who that man on the left is? I'll pretend somebody's hand is in the air. That is General MacArthur, and the man on the right is Emperor Hirohito. So these 2 former enemies worked together to rebuild Japan. Notice it's occupied Japan. It was an unconditional surrender. We agreed before that to keep Hirohito alive, but he became even more of a figurehead than he was before. This photo caused much unhappiness in Japan because if you notice MacArthur's left foot, it's slightly ahead of his right and slightly ahead of the emperor. This was considered very disrespectful to the emperor by the Japanese people, and for sure MacArthur did this on purpose. He was also standing very casually with his hands in his back pockets. He was not wearing his full military uniform, and his shirt was unbuttoned at the top. Again, all subtle but obvious signs to the Japanese people of who was in charge. We helped Japan write up a constitution with representative government, and under the terms of the treaty, they were forbidden to have a military. Therefore, much of their economic might went into electronics, computers, manufacturing goods, etc. And in the 1970s, Japan became a leading producer of cars, including Toyota and Nissan, which now outsell many American brands. We are still responsible for their military, and the largest, I think it's the 2nd largest naval base, is on Okinawa in southern Japan. But we slowly were able to rid Japan of its militaristic ideas, and today it is one of our closest allies, with a representative government and a constitution that's very similar to our own. However, when Japan loses the war, it leaves a power vacuum in Asia. They had been the leading power in the Pacific for years. Korea, if you remember, had been occupied by Japan since 1910. As the war is coming to a close, we try to decide what to do with it. And of course, the Soviet Union wants a communist government, and we want a democracy. As a result, we agreed to divide Korea at the 38th parallel, which is supposed to be temporary. USSR controls the communist government in the north, and the United States controls the democratic, in quotes, government in the south. The president in South Korea's name is Syngman Rhee. Meanwhile, to add to this vacuum, there's a lot of unrest and civil war in China. The leader of the nationalists is a man by the name of Chiang Kai-shek. And the leader of the communists, which you undoubtedly remember from 9th grade, is Mao. His name can be spelled many different ways. We know that Mao's the winner, and the nationalists flee to the island of Formosa, which is today known as Taiwan. What else happens during this time? We have our first peacetime alliance. If you remember, in President Washington's address, when he left office, he recommended that we not have any alliances because alliances get you in trouble. However, during the Cold War, the threat of communism was considered so great that the United States figured we needed to get all the free democracies together in an alliance, and that became known as NATO, which still exists today. NATO has been weakened by President Trump's disinterest and America First policy. These are some of the countries that were part of NATO when it was formed. If you notice, they're all Western and Northern European, with the exception of Canada and the United States. But that's why it's called the Atlantic Treaty Organization, because we border on that ocean as well. So this is the alliance for the capitalists, if you want to call it that, and the Soviet Union and its satellite countries form an opposing alliance in 1955, which is known as the Warsaw Pact. So again, compare this map to the two maps we've seen previously. It's very similar, with the exception of a couple of countries here that are neutral. Switzerland, Austria. If you remember, Yugoslavia is also communist, but not under their orbit. And Spain was dealing with its own post-Civil War issues. So the last part of this sort of general overview of the Cold War is the arms race. In the summer of 1949, USSR successfully detonates its own nuclear device. And in response, Truman orders our scientists to develop an even more powerful hydrogen weapon. And this marks the beginning of the arms race. And later we'll take a look at this as part of the space race in the 1950s and 60s as well.